a highly respected professor, and IEEE senior member at the University of Carthage. He has made remarkable contributions in the field of computer science, particularly in the area of deep learning and automated neural networks. Mr. Bashir will be sharing his expertise in automated design of deep neural networks architectures, a topic that is both cutting edge and highly relevant in today's technological landscape. We are fortunate to have him here to walk us through the latest advancements in the future possibilities in this field. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Slim Bashir.
Good morning. So, dear students, dear professors, it's my pleasure today to give you a talk on automated deep learning and more precisely on the automated design of deep neural network architectures within the ESB seminars for this fall session 2024. I'm Dr. Slim Bashir, full professor with the University of Carthage and research director with the Smart Laboratory at the ESG of Tunis. I lead a research team on evolutionary computing and machine learning. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to give this talk, which is entitled Automated Design of Deep Neural Networks Architectures, which is still so far a very hot and active research field in the AI community. The presentation is composed of 4 parts. So the first part is dedicated to show how deep learning could be seen as an optimization problem. In the second part, we will dive into NAS, or Neural Architecture Search, which is among the main topics of interest for both researchers and practitioners in AutoDL. After exposing the merits and the promising results of evolutionary computation approaches for neural architecture search, we will discuss in the third part of this presentation the issue of computational efficiency in evolutionary neural architecture search and deep learning architectures in general. Finally, the fourth part is devoted to some future research directions and possible perspectives. So let's start with the first part that will show how evolutionary deep learning is an AutoML approach. First, we need to remind some basic definitions related to artificial neural networks and deep learning. Based on his seminal book of deep learning by Ian Goodfellow, Yoshua Bengio, and Aaron Purville 2016, an ANN is a computational model inspired by the human brain, consisting of interconnected neurons arranged in layers that processes input data through these layers, adjusting the weights of connections based on the error of the predictions during training to learn and make accurate predictions of decisions. The right figure illustrates the similarities between the biological neuron and the artificial neuron known as perceptron. The perceptron takes multiple input signals or data features, applies weights to them, and passes the weighted sum through an activation function to produce an output signal. It learns by adjusting the weights based on the error in the output compared to the desired result, enabling it to make predictions. The left figure shows the 2 basic concepts of ANNs that are the forward propagation and the backward propagation, or backpropagation for short. Forward propagation is the process by which input data is passed through one layer to the next. This process continues until the final layer produces the network's output, which can be used for tasks like classification or regression. Backward propagation, or backpropagation for short, is the algorithm used to update the weights of the neural network based on the error of the output during training. After forward propagation, the network computes the loss by comparing the predicted output to the actual target, and backpropagation then solves this problem by calculating the gradients of the loss with respect to each weight using the chain rule, and thus allowing the network to adjust the weights to minimize the error in future predictions through techniques like gradient descent. So when the number of hidden layers is less than 3, the ANN is said to be shallow. Otherwise, it's called deep. A question that could arise here is, what's the role of hidden layers? while researchers moved from shallow models to deep models. Indeed, in deep neural networks, hidden layers play a crucial role in transforming input data into meaningful representations that help the network to make predictions or decisions. So here are the 5 main roles of hidden layers: theta extraction and transformations. Indeed, hidden layers extract and refine features from the raw input data. Each hidden layer applies a set of weights to the input data and passes it through an activation function, enabling the network to learn complex patterns and hierarchies. As data items pass through successive hidden layers, the network can learn increasingly abstract and hidden or high-level features. The second role is hierarchical theta learning. So deep neural networks learn to recognize various levels of abstraction through layers, with lower layers detecting basic features and higher layers identify complex patterns. The third role is learning nonlinear relationships. In fact, activation functions introduce nonlinearity into the network, enabling it to model complex real-world data relationships. The fourth role is dimensionality reduction and compression. Hidden layers compress input data into lower-level representations, enhancing efficiency and improving generalization by focusing on key features. And the final role is intermediate representations. In fact, the activations in hidden layers represent intermediate steps in the processing of input data. These intermediate representations are essential for the final output as they capture the necessary features and relationships that lead the network decision-making process. So this figure illustrates an experimentation by the NVIDIA company for face recognition, where a DNA with 10 layers and 1 billion parameters is trained on some millions of images for 50 GPU days. As previously discussed, we deduce from this figure the following observations. The hidden layers extract and refine features from the raw input data. Each hidden layer applies a set of weights to the input data and passes it through an activation function, enabling the network to learn complex patterns and hierarchies. And as data passes through successive hidden layers, the network can learn increasingly abstract and high-level features. So as each layer applies a transformation function to the data that it receives from the previous layer, the entire network can be seen as a single function f that represents the composition of all these layer functions. We conclude that a DNN is a function composition. In fact, a k-layer neural network is a mathematical function f, which is a composition of multivariate functions f1, f2, fk, and g, where g is the final transformation applied after the last layer. So thanks to the promising results of DNNs in many application domains, ranging from business to bioinformatics, this figure shows just some types of deep neural networks, such as the convolutional neural networks, the long short-term memory, the autoencoder, the generative adversarial network, the deep belief network, and eventually we have many others. So the question that may arise here, why all these models appeared and what are the differences between them? So by observing the different colored geometrical forms, we conclude that the main differences are the cell types included in the network, how these cells are interconnected, which defines the network topology by taking inspirations from the graph theory. For example, the CNN is characterized by the convolution cells and the pooling ones. The LSTM is distinguished by the memory cells, while the CAN is characterized by backfed input cells and match input-output cells. Each cell could be seen as a mathematical function or a composition of functions that applies a particular transformation to the received data or signals from the previous layers. Based on all these observations, designing a deep neural network is a complex task for a human being and could be seen as an optimization problem where the search space corresponds to a huge set of possible neural architectures, each defined by their hyperdata values and their topologies. So let's ask further detail how neural architecture design is an optimization problem. To answer this question, we need to define what could vary from one architecture or one design to another. Indeed, many questions should be answered first to decide the number of layers, the size of each layer, the topology of the network, the adopted activation functions, the cell type of each node, the dropout rate, and the skip connections. Eventually, many other hyperparameters already exist in the literature, and each combination of these hyperparameters could be seen as a neural architecture in a huge surface space. So this DNN design is an optimization problem. A possible question at this stage, what is deep learning from an optimization design viewpoint? So inspired by the book of Courville and his co-authors, 2016, deep learning is a set of mathematical models embedded within neural networks for discovering and extracting rich and useful internal data representations at different levels of granularities, computed as compositions of learned features and functions. Hence, the deep neural architecture design problem corresponds to finding the best combination of hyperparameters that optimizes the neural network's topology and its operators with the goal to maximize the network performance without any assistance from humans and also with limited computational budgets. Thanks to the high interest of this problem in the community, a survey paper was recently published in ICM Computing Surveys 2023 under the title Survey on Evolutionary Deep Learning Principles, Algorithms, Applications, and Open Issues. So the performance of the network architecture could be evaluated using several metrics, such as the classification accuracy, the forecasting precision, the segmentation quality, and so on. The optimal scenario would be with pure AutoML, which means that the architecture induction is performed without any human intervention. Eventually, computational resources in terms of memory, space, and time should be respected as possible. To sum up, the DNA design optimization problem could be one of the following problem variants: neural architecture search, or NAS for short, hyperparameter optimization, or HPO, model compression, or MC, and their combinations, which we call joint optimization. It's important to note that neural architecture search is usually a combinatorial problem. HPO is a continuous problem. Compression is also a combinatorial problem, which means that the variables are discrete. And eventually, the joint combinations between these problems with discrete variables and continuous ones correspond to mixed problems. And these problems are more complex to solve. So we could say that DNA design is a challenging task because the set of possible architectures of designs forms a whole search space, or let me say a huge search space. The focus of this presentation is on neural architecture search, which is the main challenging problem in the EDA field. The first architectures in the NAS field were manually crafted by humans. Among these architectures, we find LeNet, AlexNet, VGGNet, ResNet, GoogleNet, etc. The manual design is very complex due to many reasons, such as the huge number of possible architectures, the necessity of domain knowledge and expertise, the high interdependencies between components, the dynamic nature of data, the lack of definitive guidelines, the difficulty of validation, and the risk of overfitting. It's worth noting that each architecture has its own characteristics, pros and cons, and it was developed for a specific goal. To deal with the complexity of neural architecture design, a team of researchers proposed a unified description language to describe neural architectures named ArcText. This language is similar to UML, for example, in software engineering. The goal of this modeling language is to enable abundant available architectures to be vectorized and then mined by various data mining algorithms with the aim to discover useful patterns that could enrich the human expertise in manually designing neural architectures and finding relationships between their performance and their computational requirements. So the first attempt to automate the process of neural architecture search used reinforcement learning as a search strategy. It involves defining a search space of potential neural architectures and employing a reinforcement learning agent to explore this search space by selecting architecture variation or construction actions such as adding layers, adjusting hyperparameters, and so on. The agent evaluates the performance of each generated architecture on a specific task and then receives a reward based on its effectiveness. Using this feedback, the agent updates its policy to improve future generated architectures, and this iterative process continues until an optimal or satisfactory architecture is discovered. Despite the interesting results, defining the reward model and its management are two difficult and subjective tasks. Moreover, reinforcement learning is usually dominated by its greedy behavior, which makes its exploration phase difficult. This makes so the reinforcement learning able to find good, locally optimal models and not the globally optimal one. So usually the search space in NAS has a complex landscape from a geometrical viewpoint. For this reason, researchers opted to use evolutionary algorithms or genetic algorithms instead of reinforcement learning once as a search engine. The evolutionary algorithm is inspired by the principles of natural selection and genetics. It works by initializing a population of potential solutions and iteratively evolving this population through three processes that are selection, crossover, and mutation. In each generation, the fittest individuals, those that best solve the optimization problem, are selected to breed and create a new offspring. Over successive generations, the population converges towards optimal or near optimal architectures. The evolutionary algorithm is known to be effective in exploring and exploiting the search space to find high-quality solutions to complex problems, and thanks to the interesting and promising results in the application of evolutionary algorithm to NAS, a new research field appeared under the name of ENAS, or Evolutionary Neural Architecture Search. So, as previously mentioned, ENAS approaches outperformed manually crafting and reinforcement learning-based approaches in searching for optimized deep neural network architectures. So, motivated by the published results in this field, the team of researchers developed a world platform to implement, experiment, and compare ENAS method on varied benchmark datasets related to many application domains. This platform is named BenENAS and is free and open source. As illustrated by this figure, BenENAS is composed of 5 models that are ENAS algorithms, data settings, trainer settings, runner, and comparer. After the user has selected the ENAS algorithm to run in the ENAS algorithms model, the data and the trainer for the training of DNNs are configured through the data setting model and the trainer setting model. The selected ENAS algorithm is then run through the runner model, and the results are output to the comparer model. By running multiple ENAS algorithms with the same data settings and the same trainer settings in the runner model, users can get relatively fair comparison results. And it's important to note that the runner uses multiple GPU-based computation nodes to accelerate the fitness evaluation of each generated architecture. Moreover, the comparer model includes multiple performance indicators such as the accuracy, the flops or number of floating operations, the parameter size, and the number of GPU days, which allows the empirical evaluation of ENAS approaches from different viewpoints. So let's move now to the second part of this presentation, which will focus on the ENAS field. And we start by the search space and encoding, which is the first part in ENAS. The first question that the machine learning engineer or researcher should answer when designing an ENAS method is how to encode a neural architecture so that the evolutionary algorithm could process it and optimize it. There are four encoding levels in ENAS: the layer, the block, the cell, and the topology. The layer corresponds to a set of norms or units that process the input using predefined operations such as convolution, activations, and pooling. The block corresponds to a set of interconnected layers. The cell is just a specific set of interconnected operations or layers, such as convolutions, pooling, and activations also. And finally, the topology is the structural arrangement and the connectivity of neurons, layers, or models within the neural network. So these four figures illustrate each of the different levels for better understandability of each of the concepts of layer, block, cell, and topology. And we could say that layers, block, and cells encode the network building blocks, while topology encodes the network connectivity. So let's now study the pros and cons of each of these building blocks. The layer-based encoding is simple to implement and easy to understand. However, it doesn't capture interaction between layers and may cause the problem of gradient vanishing or gradient exploding. The block-based encoding is able to capture reusable components and support hierarchical structures, but it's hard to optimize and may lead to redundant blocks. The cell-based encoding is highly flexible and good for discovering new architectures, but it may lead to overfitting and convergence to local minima due to complex interdependencies. So the second question that ENAS practitioner or machine learning engineer should precisely answer is how to vary neural architectures in the search space. Differently speaking, how the evolutionary algorithm should generate new architectures to converge toward the optimal one. So assuming we have a set of convolution, pooling, and identity mapping operations listed by this table, we assign each of these operations a numerical index as a unique identifier from 0 to 10 for this example. The left figure illustrates how two types of cells, the normal cell and the reduction cell, are encoded within the evolutionary algorithm. In fact, each cell is encoded by two vectors. The upper vector, named link, encodes the network topology in terms of connections between operations for each node. The lower vector, named ops, encodes the operations of each node. This encoding allows the variation of both operations and topologies simultaneously. This figure illustrates two different crossover operators, namely the holistic crossover and the hybrid crossover. In holistic crossover, topology information and computing operations are preserved for each node under the hypothesis that the good building blocks of the parents are characterized by the information encoded in both operations and connectivity. Differently, the hybrid crossover breaks the coupling between operations types and connections relationships and separates the connectivity encoding from the operations encoding, under the assumption that good topological genes and operations genes could be inherited from parents and mixed within children architectures. So designing an effective crossover operator is challenging. Several criteria should be ensured as possible, such as the meaningfulness and effectiveness of generated neural architectures, the ability to deal with variable length architectures during the crossover operation, and the balance between exploration of the search space and exploitation of the parent architectures. Moreover, there are additional secondary criteria that are associated, such as the scalability with the architecture size, the avoidance of redundant architectures or sub-architectures, and the incorporation of domain knowledge without overfitting with data. The final operator in the evolutionary algorithm is mutation, which corresponds to making a slight change in the architecture to diversify the population in the search space and further escape local optima or locally optimal neural architectures. As illustrated by this figure, this could be done by a single point flip at path level operations of links. Eventually, the mutation operator could face the same challenges as the crossover one. So we move now to the fitness function model, which has the role to evaluate the quality of each generated neural architecture in the evolutionary algorithm and to guide the populations towards promising search directions. The fitness function is called whenever we need to assign an architecture a quality value. This is done at two stages, the initialization stage and the evaluation stage. At the initialization stage, a population of neural architectures is randomly generated and then each of its elements is evaluated. And at the evaluation stage, each generated or mutated offspring architecture undergoes quality evaluation. It's important to note that most ENAS algorithms use the binary tournament selection operator as it allows escaping local optima by its stochastic acceptance of worse architectures with a base to fitness improvements. So through the ENAS literature, many performance metrics have been used as fitness functions. Some of them favors effectiveness, while some others favors efficiency. So among the effectiveness-based fitness functions, we cite the validation accuracy, the cross entropy loss, the F1 score when we have imbalanced data, for example, the area under curve, and the robustness. The choice of the fitness function depends on the characteristics of the data set and the application domain. Among efficiency-based fitness functions, we find the training time, the model size in terms of the number of parameters, and energy efficiency, especially in tiny ML and edge computing, for example. In addition to multi-objective combinations of these metrics that meet the customer's needs. It's important to note that the simultaneous consideration of multiple metrics requires multi-objective optimization because metrics could be conflicting with each other, and thus we need to have a good trade-off among them. In summary, the fitness computation for a single architecture requires training it on the data set and then evaluating it on the validation data set. And this makes the overall evolutionary algorithm process very computationally costly and may consume some tens or even some hundreds of days of GPU days to be executed for a single run. So based on this observation, the third part of this talk is devoted to solution approaches that allow dealing with efficiency in terms of memory and storage in ENAS. To deal with the efficiency in ENAS, there are three directions that will be discussed next. These directions are for the generation of efficient architectures. So let's start with proxy metrics. The main goal of proxy metrics is to liberate ENAS from the expensive training process. The main idea is to design proxies that can predict the accuracy of some given networks without training the network parameters. This practice is called zero-shot neural architecture search. Several proxy metrics have been proposed through the literature. Some of them are based on the gradient information, while some others are gradient-free. The main goals of good proxy metrics is to ensure three aspects: trainability of the network, expressivity, and generalization. The trainability means that the network architecture is sufficiently complex to capture the underlying patterns in the data and to converge toward a minimum loss value during training or weight update while avoiding underfitting or overfitting. The expressivity refers to the model ability to approximate complex functions and capture intricate patterns in data. It describes how well a neural network can represent a wide range of functions based on its architecture, parameters, and interactions between its layers. The generalization reflects the network ability to generalize from the training data to unseen or out of distribution data. A network with high generalization capacity should not only perform well on the training data, but also on new examples, indicating that the architecture has learned meaningful and transferable representations. One of the most interesting proxy metrics is the Jacobian covariant, or Jacob-Cov for short, which is published in the paper by Miller and his co-author 2021, who leads a research team from the University of Edinburgh. And this paper is published under an attractive title, Neural Architecture Search Without Training. How to find a neural architecture without any training. And this is really very attractive. This team of researchers designed a correlation score and then performed an empirical experiment as follows. They explored a high number of neural architectures, more than 15,000 architectures from the NIS Bench 201 benchmark. Then they selected a mini batch from the CFAR10 image dataset and computed both the correlation of each untrained architecture and the accuracy of each trained architecture. After that, they plotted these histograms that show the following observations. At this stage, what's the correlation score that is able to act as a performance predictor of a neural architecture, and how this correlation score allows predicting architecture accuracy without any training. Indeed, this correlation score is the Jacobian covariant, and its main idea is to compute a linear map around each data point from a mini batch of data along the loss function of the network architecture. This means that for each data point, we freeze the nonlinearity and just reconsider the tangent to the loss function. This could be expressed by the Jacobian matrix, which contains partial derivatives of the network's output with respect to the inputs xi from this mini batch. The same process could be applied to any architecture. So let's consider a second architecture shown on the right part of this slide. The question here, what architecture is better? Eventually, the neural network on the left is better because it's producing a more complex output with noticeable fluctuations. This complexity suggests that all parameters are meaningfully contributing to the output, as opposed to the network on the right, where it appears that only a single parameter might be active, indicating potential ineffectiveness of loss of signal. By examining the slopes of the gradients of the linearized functions for various data points from the mini batch, the correlation of this gradient is assessed. A diverse range of slopes indicates that the parameters are effectively capturing different aspects of the input data, whereas similar slopes suggests a lack of contribution from multiple parameters. Instead of calculating gradients with respect to the weights, as it's a typical practice in deep learning, calculating gradients with respect to the input data allows detecting how input changes affect the output. And this methodology allows evaluating the network expressivity and trainability with respect to the input data. So the question that should be answered now is how to score these neural architectures. In fact, the Jacob covariant allows us such a scoring as follows. The Jacobian matrix J contains information about the network output with respect to the input for several data points. We then can evaluate how points belonging to the same class correlate with each other, while the goal is to see if an untrained network is capable of more than complex functions. A flexible network should simultaneously be able to distinguish local linear operators from each data point, but also have similar results for similar data points, which is in a supervised approach means that the data points belong to the same class. The perfect scenario is to have an untrained network with low correlation between different data points, where data points of the same category are closer to each other, which means that the network easily learns to distinguish between these data points during training. So from a mathematical viewpoint, the starting point is computing the Jacobian matrix J. Afterwards, the correlation of J values with respect to the classes is evaluated by computing a covariance matrix for each class presented in J. Then each element from the covariance matrix Cj is scaled. And finally, the Jacobian covariance score is computed based on the eigenvalues sigma, where k is a small constant used for numerical stability. To check whether the Jacob covariant proxy depends on the input of the mini batch of data, the initialization process of the data noise, the author performed an ablation study. They reported results that show that the Jacob curve is robust to such factors, which makes this proxy enough effective to estimate the expressivity and the trainability of neural architecture without the training. So we move now to the second research direction related to efficiency in ENAS, which corresponds to building surrogate models. So as its name indicates, a surrogate is a model of a function that substitutes heavy computations by providing an estimate of the performance of particular solution based on limited amount of data. Surrogates have been used for a long time for expensive optimization, where the fitness function calculation is very computationally costly, ill-defined, or even impossible to measure, such as the case of chemical experiments of the aerodynamic research field. In ENAS, the surrogate is usually a machine learning model and could be seen also as a neural network. It could work in two modes, offline and online. In online models, a set of candidate solutions together with their ground truth objective values are collected to train the surrogate before the start of the optimization process. By contrast, in online models, there are no more restrictions on the training of the surrogate model with limited offline data, but during the evolutionary search, the new data points can be actively sampled and evaluated by the objective function to get ground truth labels. Consequently, we can enrich the size and the quality of the training set of the surrogate model with the aim to improve its prediction accuracy of the neural architecture. A key point in online surrogate-based ENAS approaches is the model management strategy, which defines and adapts the sampling size, the frequency of sampling, and the selection criteria to strike a good balance between exploration of the search space of neural architectures and exploitation of good architectures. For example, some researchers suggest that best architectures in terms of the surrogate should be evaluated with the real fitness function to enrich the ground truth data of the surrogate model. So essentially, there are four types of surrogates: learning curve, weighted sharing, shallow training, and end-to-end performance predictors. Learning curve-based predictors consists in building a regression model for each DNN based on the partial learning curve. In weighted sharing, a supernet is fully trained before running the ENAS process. Then the weights of the DNN are directly inherited from the supernet. Shallow training-based predictors corresponds to training a DNN with a small number of training samples or training epochs. And finally, end-to-end performance predictors consists in collecting a group of DNNs with their corresponding performance values and then building a regression model to map the DNN architectures to their performance values. However, each of these surrogate-based approaches has its own shortcomings. For learning curve-based predictors, learning curves of DNN are non-smooth, which is caused by the scheduling of learning rates during the training of modern DNNs. For weighted sharing, it's assumed that the weights of the DNN are independent with each other. However, this dependency exists only for networks with two layers. Shallow training-based predictors have poor generalization due to the insufficient training of DNNs. And finally, end-to-end performance predictors have a high dependency of the order of the sample in the data set, as different orders yield different regression models and thus different predictors for the same DNN. So these two figures illustrates how the training data order mislead the surrogate because the two resultant curves are very different. Thus, curve-based approaches are not a reliable choice for surrogate-based neural architecture research. In summary, despite all this effort by researchers and engineers from designing and training an effective surrogate is still a computationally costly process. So let's move now to some advanced ENAS method that allow generating efficient architectures. So the intention is still heavy, but the generated architecture will be very light. So some researchers proposed to use objective optimization because accuracy and complexity are two conflicting objectives. If you would like to have a network architecture with more accuracy, usually we need to have more layers, more parameters, and so on. But this will make the architecture very heavy. But if we would like to, let's say, to filter some weights or to prune the architecture, we will reduce the complexity, but the accuracy will be degraded. So by using evolutionary algorithms, we can obtain a set of what we call Pareto optimal solutions, or a Pareto front, where each point of the front corresponds to an architecture expressing a trade-off between accuracy and complexity. Some other researchers used advanced techniques in evolutionary computation, such as co-evolution, where the goal is to prune the architecture in terms of filters and channels also. So for co-evolution, the population of the evolutionary algorithm is divided into subpopulation, and each subpopulation is responsible for pruning a layer in terms of filters. And in this way, for n layers, we will have n subpopulations. After that, the populations will cooperate with each other to form the final network architecture. But the problem here is that one population could converge before the other, and this could cause really a challenging problem. And finally, some researchers suggested the use of bi-level optimization, or what we call here bi-level evolutionary joint design of CNN architectures and its corresponding pruning. In fact, when we would like to generate a deep neural architecture, we have a set of parameters, a set of components, and so on, but each design, to be fairly evaluated, need to be pruned first. So before evaluating a design, we need to prune it. And this is why we have formulated this problem as a bi-level optimization problem, where the pruning problem is a constraint within the optimization problem of the design problem. And in another work with one of my PhD students, we have worked on both channel and filter pruning simultaneously, where we filter or we prune the filters at the upper level and we prune the channels at the lower levels. So channel pruning will be a constraint within filter pruning. These are advanced techniques, but it's good to know where the field is moving on. So let's now move to the final section of this talk, which will describe some possible research directions and perspectives. So today we are living in the age of generative AI, or Gen AI, thanks to the advancement of natural language processing in the transformer architecture of neural networks and big data or big unstructured data. So even ENAS has been influenced by Gen AI. Indeed, today, what we make is that we generate solutions by operators that use LLMs to generate neural architectures. So in this way, the variation operators within the evolutionary algorithms are based on large language models, such as this example where we use a lightweight LLM that is CodeGen 8.1b. And we use the evolutionary algorithm that is called quality diversity optimization. And thanks to this combination between LLMs and evolutionary algorithms, these researchers were able to generate 20 competitive deep neural network architectures with only 2,000 evaluations, which represents a promising cost-effectiveness ratio. So another very interesting direction is tiny machine learning. Today we are living in cloud machine learning, edge machine learning, and we need to use small devices where we should execute architectures on small amount of data. So to generate small architectures that could be a good fit for microcontrollers, for mobile phones, for any other small equipment. So we need to work on tiny neural architecture search, which is becoming a side field of neural architecture search. And finally, a very interesting topic on which engineers are actually very active is federated learning or federated learning architecture search. In fact, companies or organizations have the constraint to share their data publicly. So it's not possible to share data without any agreement or any laws. This is why neural architecture search could be a good fit or a good solution for this problem by training just a subnetwork on each data for a particular organization and then fusing or merging all these subnetworks to form the subnetwork for all these organizations. And this could be a hot topic because many technologies, many recent technologies could be used at this stage, such as TinyML, such as also transfer learning, and eventually the main concepts of privacy and federated learning. And finally, thank you for your attention. Your questions are welcome, your comments.
Hello again. I want to thank Mr. Steve Bashir. Please applaud to him for this analysis content from the automated design of deep learning and networks and neural networks. Please, if you have questions, can you hold your questions?
So, hello everyone. Thank you, Mr. Slim, for this seminar. So, I have 3 questions. So, you introduced the NS architecture or algorithm. So, what is its input and what is its output? And the second question is the type of GPU you have done the experiment. So, you said that you have experiment 30 days and 100 days of GPU. So, okay. I'm asking what's the type of the GPU? And
please let's start with 2 questions, okay? And then we go to the third one. So for GPUs, the experiments were done by NVIDIA, okay? So these experiments were done by NVIDIA, which is a very well-known company, international company, with a lot of equipment that allow making such experiments. So it's not me that made such experiment. For the input of the evolutionary algorithm for neural architecture search, we need to provide just some few parameters such as the population size and the crossover rate, the mutation rate, and the number of generations. And which is really very influencing is how to encode the neural architecture, because there are many ways to encode an architecture. As you know, in data structures, you could encode something like a vector, a graph, a tree, or a particular type of trees, and then you manipulate these data structures through a set of methods. But in genetic algorithm, we need to have, let's say, an encoding that allows the algorithm to understand this encoding, evaluate it, and vary this encoding from one generation to another. So it looks like solving an optimization problem. I don't know if you have already seen some optimization algorithms in your courses, but optimization corresponds to moving from one solution or one point to another in a huge search space to find the best solution or the optimal one. And when the search space is huge, we need to approximate it. So we can't guarantee that the solution is optimal. So this optimization process is projected to the problem of induction of deep neural networks. So in the same manner, we have a search space of hyperparameters and possible topologies. These hyperparameters and topologies are encoded by two levels. As I said, the link level encodes the connectivity of topology. The operation levels encodes the operations of the functions used in the deep neural networks. And after that, we should carefully vary these architectures to generate meaningful architectures, because I could make a crossover between two architectures and then I obtain meaningless architectures with very poor performance. Okay, so this is why the feasibility of architectures and the feasibility of variations is of great interest for the machine learning engineer. So I hope that I will answer your question. And so if you have some comments on my answer, please welcome. Otherwise, we could move to your third question.
Thank you, Mr. Slim. So the third question is what is batch normalization in artificial neural networks and when to position it in our architecture? So
what is
batch normalization?
Batch normalization.
So we put it before and or after the activation function, and how to
okay.
put it in.
So batch normalization could be seen as a component within the neural network. Okay, so this component is like, let me say, convolution node, pooling node, let me say, skip connection model. It's just a building block, you see. So we consider all the possible building blocks for a particular architecture. For example, if I would like to work on convolutional neural networks, I consider only blocks of, let me say, nodes, functions that are meaningful for such type of network. But I not use, for example, recurrent cells which are used for LSTM, for example. You see? So the problem here is that when you have data, you don't know the statistical distribution of data. As you know, in machine learning, the big question is how to approximate the statistical distribution of data. Yes or no? Okay. So as data vary from one business domain to another, or from one industrial domain to another, I could work on biology, on financial data, I don't know, on chemical data, and so on images, on video, on, let me say, audio sequences. So this component will be varied from one architecture to another, okay? It's not the component that will be internally varied, but its position, its place, you see, its location within the network. So, for example, I have a CNN. How many layers should I have? How many nodes per each layer should I have? I don't know. This is really very complex, and as many engineers do actually, is to make trial and error, yes or no, the trial and error method. I try the architecture, and then I execute it. I expect some results, and these results are stochastic, they are not deterministic, as the overall execution of the neural network is not deterministic, it's stochastic, it's influenced by stochastic factors, and it's really very difficult to make an exact decision. You see, you could make your decision and you are fine with your architecture, and it's fine for me. I'm satisfied with this architecture and I stop the search process. It's okay. But when you have complex data, and today we live with unstructured, complex, and even out of distribution data, okay, we need to automatically or to automate the search process for neural architectures. So the output will be a good architecture for this data set, for a particular business domain. But this architecture could be very poor for another domain, you see? So it depends. And this is why one of the inputs of the evolutionary algorithm will be also the data. And this is why I talked about efficiency, because the generation of each architecture requires evaluating this generated architecture. You see? Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Limshi. Thank you, Rasim, for your great questions. Do you have any other questions? So, thank you so much for your presence. We want to thank Mr. Slim again. Please.